All right, well, let's bring in our next guest to talk more about this. Tone Vays, derivatives trader and consultant. Great to have you here with us, Tone, on the show. What's your take right now on the Bitcoin sell-off?
Thank you for having me on. I think that Bitcoin is still going through a bit of a bear market. We hit a high in mid-December of just under 20,000. And there was a bull trap when it came back up to 17,000. Lots of people think that we bottomed out at 6,000, considering it was a 75% correction. But I've already seen the price go back down to 6,500. We just touched 7,000. This is not how markets typically bottom. There's usually a capitulation where people get really, really upset and angry that they're in a bad investment. So I think there is still one more low yet to come over the next 3 months.
Okay, and so as we're watching this, where do you think that Bitcoin goes, even say 12 months from now? What are we talking about with Bitcoin?
It's really difficult to gauge how high it's going to go in about 12 months because I don't know where the bottom is.
But you say how high it's going to go, not that it's going to move lower?
It could move lower for the next 3 to 4 months. It is going to start to go back up. I am expecting a low to come in sometime this year, but it's hard to say where that low is going to be. My most optimistic low-end target is about 5,000. Most pessimistic low-end target is 1,300. So if that target is achieved in the next month and a half, we could be back above current levels by end of year. If that target is achieved later in the year, we might still be looking at $3,000–4,000 Bitcoin towards the end of the year. But I still believe in Bitcoin. I still think the future is bright. It just overshot to the upside, and now it has to overshoot to the downside. It's just the way all markets function.
Now, you used to work at Bear Stearns assessing risk. How do you mitigate risk in an environment like this for Bitcoin?
It's very, very difficult. Bitcoin is a great tool to diversify your current portfolio. So if you are invested in bonds and stocks and everything else, Bitcoin gives you that additional uncorrelated asset that gives you a more balanced portfolio. But if you have everything tied up in Bitcoin or everything tied up in cryptocurrencies, you're not diversified at all.
Why would you want an uncorrelated asset when you could have a correlated asset like Ethereum in your portfolio that is really more reliant on some of the major players taking on an Ethereum network and installing that infrastructure into their programming there?
I'm not a big believer in the Ethereum network. I believe that Bitcoin is the most stable blockchain we have. And I think the Ethereum protocol is dangerous from a technological perspective and a regulatory perspective. There was a lot of noise last week whether the SEC may or may not consider Ethereum a security because the 80% of Ethereum were still ICOs that were created out of thin air by a group of people. So I think there is lots of risk there, and Bitcoin is a true decentralization value transfer. Ethereum gives you the proposition of decentralized smart contracts, but there's no censorship in contracts. So I'm not sure what their value proposition really is other than a platform to build ICOs.
And why are you still bullish right now on Bitcoin?
I'm bullish on Bitcoin for the underlying technology. I believe that Satoshi Nakamoto's invention of the blockchain with proof of work gave us, for the first time in human history, an asset of value that is unconfiscatable. We're now hearing noise about Italy having potential problems. Maybe they're going to have a banking crisis like the Greece and the Cyprus had about 3 to 5 years ago. And in those cases, the only asset that keeps you safe is Bitcoin because it's just unconfiscatable. You can't freeze it. You can't take it away. And the concept of sending value to anyone in the world without restriction is a very valuable property. And these properties, people are just starting to understand how powerful these properties are of value transfer.
What's the best event that could take place for Bitcoin right now that propels it back towards an upward trajectory?
This may sound weird, but the best possible thing for Bitcoin is this fight against cash. The elimination of cash by lots of governments because they don't like this idea of cash. They want everything to be digital, everything to be electronic. And that works great for Bitcoin because it replaces that cash element that people are used to with those $100 bills and puts them right on the internet with even better use cases.
Well, that's a very long-term type of battle that's going on. And so in the near term, I mean, one of the recent reports I saw, I think it was in Forbes, was that even things like the World Cup match where in Russia they're increasingly allowed to gamble or bet using Bitcoin or paying for tickets using Bitcoin, especially when some of the major U.S. transactions companies have had trouble because because of some of the walls around Russia working in that region. Is that one of the near-term items that could be a positive for Bitcoin?
It is. It's always a positive for Bitcoin, but on the flip side of that, the Supreme Court has just legalized gambling in the U.S., so now the Bitcoin isn't as useful in your gambling if it's legal for you to do it normally. You don't need that censorship-resistant payment. So while that's good for use, the price, as you know, like with most of the other things, are driven by speculations, fear, and greed. And while we're going through the bear market, good news will give you short-term bumps, and bad news would be exaggerated. So until this bear market plays out, almost no good news will drive it back up. News never changes the trajectory of the overall trend of the market. It has to be the last person just needs to sell, and then the only people left are the ones that are willing to buy.
There's a lot of speculation around whether or not regulation would actually be good for cryptocurrencies. What's your take?
I think that if you're doing an ICO, if you're working with a lot of these altcoins, they are significantly more centralized, and regulation can hit them really, really hard. The SEC can come down on all ICOs like other countries did. And if that happens, the ICOs will not be as popular, and that could drive more demand into Bitcoin, because right now, a lot of these ICOs are so cheap and people see them as a better gambling and speculative tools that they're throwing their money in there. And so it is sucking out some of the interest that could go into Bitcoin, because they don't see Bitcoin appreciating as much as your 5-cent ICO or a pre-ICO. Yeah. But as far as Bitcoin is concerned, the concept of Bitcoin is for it to be unregulatable. If Bitcoin can be regulated, it wouldn't be worth $7,000 today.
You mentioned sports gambling a moment ago, so I just want to come back to that real quick. Do you think there is a role for Bitcoin, for cryptocurrency, in sports gambling going forward?
Oh, absolutely. It's very, very useful, because when it's time for you to send money to, in order to place a bet, bank wires take a lot of time, and a lot of the countries where sports gambling is frowned upon, the banks will not let you send money to a gambling site.
So to bring more action in from overseas, from
correct.
Countries
and using something like credit cards, no gambling site will let you use a credit card, because you'll charge up a credit card $1,000, place it on a 1 to 100 bet on a horse. If you lose, you claim that as a stolen card. If you win, you keep the 1,000 to 1 bet. Bitcoin removes that. Within 10 to 20 minutes, the value through Bitcoin you send is confirmed, and you can place any bet you like, and there's no chargebacks. So something like Bitcoin is very useful in the world of gambling, not only for censorship resistance, but very quick and final payments.
We certainly appreciate the time here today and all the insights you've been able to provide. It's Tone Vays, trader and consultant, joining us here today on Cheddar. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, guys.
Absolutely. Coming up.